I wanted to end with something that I'm particularly curious about. You haven't spoken to Sam Harris on the show, have you?
Not on my podcast, no.
Not on your podcast? Okay, well,
And I don't. I think I was on his podcast. He said so many podcasts, I don't know which one I was on.
yeah. But I am not sure which book it was in. No, I think it was from In a Universe from Nothing. But
Uh-huh.
you wrote that just as religion hasn't helped us understand the way the world is with regard to science, as you just echoed a few minutes ago, I think you prophesized, maybe that's not the right word, that it will also be shown that religion wasn't at all helpful with regard to morality, and that science might help us better in this respect. And I imagine that the religion not helping us with morality, we can just point to God is not great to give us some great examples of that. But where do you think that we ought to derive our moral knowledge or our moral principles from,
Well,
if not
you
something
use the
like
right word, ought. I do think I do agree with Hume that you can't get ought from is, but I do think that science and maybe empirical evidence and logic and strict logic and reason applied to empirical evidence is the only way one can get a reasonable morality. And it does not everything, but without knowing what the implications of your actions are, you can't decide what actions are good. Now, does science tell you always which actions are good? No, but it can tell you. But it can tell you what the implications of your actions are. And a reasonable person, using reason, could decide that actions are bad based on that. So I think morality without science is impossible.
Okay. And this might be too philosophical for you. That's okay. But then does our notion of what good is that supposed to come from science as well? Or
Well, again, not unambiguously, but you can make rational arguments, and utilitarian philosophers like my friend Peter Singer would argue that you can look at the implications of actions. And one of the things you might say is that the greatest good for the greatest number of people, or you can make a lot of arguments which are rational. And I don't know if you can, I don't think you can ever decide between them on the basis of the science alone, but you can at least produce alternatives that rational people can debate.
But I mean, just taking like a simple example, like it would be bad if I just hit my dog who's sitting right behind me. Is the reason that science would tell us this is bad is that if we hooked up a brain monitor to him or something, it would cause pain, and we've just decided that pain is bad.
That's one reason. There's a lot of arguments you can think of. You can show that it would cause pain, but is pain bad? If you're a masochist, maybe it isn't. So you could argue that maybe pain isn't so bad, but you could also argue if you're a dog, then dogs will become violent, and they won't be good pets, and they'll be dangerous, and therefore, you can make all sorts of arguments for why it would lead to a society that's not as stable or happy. But at some level, it always comes down to things that I think are debatable, but reasonable people can debate and try and lead to and try and use reason to convince oneself. So I think you can't get off from this, but you can get damn close. You can lead in the right direction.